Today, I'm going to tell you the first great story here in our Montessori elementary class. Some of you have heard this before, and some of you are hearing it for the very first time. So, this is how the story goes. From the beginning, people have been aware of God. They could not see Him, but they could feel Him. So people in many different languages have been asking, who is God and where can He be found? These are the kinds of questions that they asked the wise men. And so the wise men would say, He is the most perfect of beings. And He is everywhere. He can be in heaven and on earth, and He can just be everywhere. He sees everything, and He knows everything, even your most secret thoughts. What can I do? Said the people. Then the wise men said, well, whatever He wishes. And then the people would ask again, but what has God actually done? God has done everything that has ever happened. He is the master and creator of everything. He created everything, and everything that He created obeys His laws. In the beginning, there was only God, and He was completely perfect, and He was completely happy. Yet, out of His goodness, He created things that came into being. He created the heavens and the earth, and everything that is in it. So He created everything that's visible and invisible. He created the waters and the seas. He created all kinds of animals and all kinds of plants. And He created man. Man, just like the animals, was made out of the particles of the earth. But God created man differently from the animals. For into man's body, which would die, God breathed a soul which would never die. People thought that this is just a tale. And so they would ask the wise men, we want to see God. Where is He? The wise men would answer, God is a spirit. If He is a spirit, people said, we are wondering, how can a spirit make everything that's visible here on earth? How can He make the stars twinkle at night? And how can He make the sun shine during daytime? How can He make all these beautiful flowers and all these towering trees? How can He make the fish swim in the ocean and the waves pound on the seashore? We're wondering about that. If He is everywhere and He is anywhere, did everybody see Him at all? People would ask. And if He is the master and creator of everything, why would we believe that? And really, it does seem impossible. How can the animals and the plants and the water and the rocks obey God? And how can the animals obey God when we talk to them? They don't even understand us. And how can the waves stop right where it stops as a way of obeying God? People would really wonder. But as you shall see, everything that has been created, everything that is in heaven and on earth, obeys the will of God. And just by it being there, it is already obeying the will of God. So if you feel the wind brushing your cheeks, that is the wind's way of saying, Lord, I obey. And if you see the stars twinkle at night, that is the stars' way of saying, Lord, I obey. And if you can smell the fragrant scent of the flower, that is the flower's way of saying, Lord, I obey. But how did this all came to be? Let's go back from the very beginning. At first, there was just this immense space. And in that space, there was no beginning and no end. And there was so much coldness and darkness that you just cannot imagine. And then God said, "Let there be light." And so there was light. When you think of darkness, you will think of night. But the darkness that we experience at night is way much brighter than this darkness that was in the space before. And when you think of cold, you will imagine the coldness of ice. But this coldness of ice is positively hot compared to this indescribable coldness of space. And in that immense darkness and coldness, there appeared a big and massive fiery cloud. In that cloud was the whole universe. This big and massive fiery cloud was very, very hot, indescribably hot, that everything that we know of, all the substances that we know of, the iron, the gold, the earth, all of them, they were just gases in. You could not even notice them at all. This fiery cloud was intensely hot, that the sun that we have today would just feel like a piece of ice. But even if this fiery cloud is huge and massive, still it would look like a tiny drop of water compared to this never-ending, measureless vastness of space. As this massive light and heat moved through the vastness of space, little drops fell from it. This is just like when you hold a glass of water and you swing it like this, and then drops of water would fall from it. And then some of the drops would hold together and some of the drops will just go separate from each other. The stars that we see at night are just like these little drops of water. But instead of falling, the stars just keep going round in the vastness of space. And they never meet. They could be millions of miles away from each other. Some of these stars are so far from us that it takes millions of years for their light to reach us here on Earth. But do you know how fast light travels? Light travels 186,000 miles, not per hour, but per second. Or that would be 300,000 kilometers per second. 300,000 kilometers per second. Wow. And do you know how big the world is? The world is 25,000 miles. And that would mean light could travel around the whole world 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in just 1 second. 7 times around the whole world in just 1 second. So now you can imagine how far some of these stars are, that it takes millions of years for their light to reach us. And now you can imagine how vast, how wide the space is, that it could contain stars that are that far from us. And according to scientists, out there in the space, there's billions of stars. And one of these billions of stars is our sun. Yep, our sun. And our planet, the Earth, is really small compared to the sun. The Earth is just 1/millionth of the size of the sun. The sun might look small to us because it's so far from us, but it is actually very, very big, that one of its flames could contain 22 Earths. Let's take a look at this chart here. This is an image of the sun. And look here, this tiny speck here is actually the Earth. It is so tiny, and it is only 1/millionth of the size of the sun. And here, in this flame here of the sun, 22 Earths could actually fit there. When God called the stars into being, He had everything planned out. He gave special laws for them to follow too. So to some particles He said, you will have a special love for one another, and you will cling together. And to other particles He also said that some of you will not like each other, and you will have a certain dislike, and you will move away from each other. And just like as human beings, some human beings like each other, and so they come together and form groups. And some human beings have a certain dislike from one another, and they just move away from each other. Let me show you something for you to see the kind of laws that God gave to the particles. So I have here a bowl full of water, and I have some pieces of paper here. Okay, so watch what I'm gonna do. So as you can see, some of the pieces of paper were really close to each other. They came really close to each other. And some of the pieces of paper were kind of close, but not too close. And some just moved further away on their own. And just like these pieces of paper on the bowl, particles also behave the same way. The particles of the solids hold really close and tight to each other. And no matter what you do, even if you break that solid, still its particles would really cling closely to each other. But for the liquids, yeah, their particles also come close with each other, but not too close, such that when you pour a liquid into a glass or a pitcher, their particles just roll over and they occupy the shape and the space that they have been poured into. And for the gases, their particles do not cling to each other at all. They just move away from each other. The particles are just like different individuals. They did not become solid, liquid, or gas all at the same time. At certain temperatures, some of them became solid, some of them became liquid, and some of them became gaseous. While obeying these laws, one of those little drops from the massive fiery cloud just started going and going and going around in the coldness of space. And then it started to go around and around another drop, which was to become our sun. And as time went on, this mass that was going around and around in the coldness of space and around the sun started a dance of elements. The particles that were on the outermost part of this mass started to get cold, and they came closer to each other. They huddled together and they hurried to the earth. But when they reached the part that was really, really hot, they moved away and went back up again. And just like little angels, they carried a bucket of hot coal into the coldness of space. And then they returned to the earth with a bucket of cold ice. And how marvelous that is. If you become hot, you expand, you become lighter, and then you soar upwards. And then when you become cold, you shrink, and then you go downwards, just like how sand settles at the bottom of the sea. This dance of the elements kept going and going and going for millions of years. And just like all these tired dancers here, elements started to settle down. First, they became liquid, and then some of them became solid. Others just remained liquid and just remained solid, and they combined with other particles to form new substances. The heaviest ones settled at the center of the earth, and the lighter ones floated above them. A thin layer was formed on top of the earth, just like when you boil a cup of milk, there is this scum that forms on the top layer of the milk. But inside the skin and underneath, it is still very, very hot. And so, what do? They just follow the law of God. And the law says, if you're hot, you expand and you go up. But the hot particles inside the skin could not do it. Where can they go? There's just no more room for expansion. So they broke the skin, and it was like a terrible fight. That was formed at the surface turned into vapor and went up immediately. And there were also clouds that gathered on top of the terrible fight that was going on. The clouds covered everything up because the sun was ashamed of them. Eventually, the fighting stopped, and more gases became liquid, and some liquids became solids. The earth shrank and became like a wrinkled mango that has been left untouched for a long time on a fruit tree. The wrinkles are the mountains that were formed, and the hollows are the oceans. As the rocks cooled down, water was able to go back to the earth. And so it rained and it rained and it rained. And water entered every hollow along its path. It went through every crevice along its path as well. And so the oceans were formed. And above the oceans was the air that we breathed. The cloud that once covered the fighting that was going on has disappeared. And now the sun could see the whole earth once again, and with all the water that has filled the hollows, and the sun can now appreciate and smile at its beautiful daughter, the earth. Rocks, water and air, solids, liquids and gases They follow the same laws from the very beginning of time. And up until now, they still follow the same laws, and it is their way of saying, Lord, I obey. So that's the first great story of the universe. In the following days, you will hear about the second great story of the coming of life. And afterwards, there's more and more stories here in our Montessori elementary class. And the next one would be a story for another day.